Hey, True Hope First Baptist folks, this is Wes Labor. It is April the 24th. I'm talking about our daily reading for today, which is Daniel 7, the whole chapter. I'm going to quickly summarize, assuming that you read it, and then talk about my thoughts about the passage. So Daniel 7 is about a vision that Daniel has of these four beasts that arise from the four winds of the earth. It's very apocalyptic. They're all mixes of different animals. The last one's the most ferocious. It has iron claws, etc. And then after all these beasts arise, the Ancient of Days shows up and judges all of them, and he's a figure of power, has a throne that shoots out fire and stuff like that. And the Ancient of Days also sets up one like a son of man who will be an eternal king. And as I read through this, the first thing that struck me was that Daniel was writing during Nebuchadnezzar's reign, and then this description of all these beasts that represent kings suggests that things were going to get worse for the Israelites, that the fourth king was more ferocious and more violent. So that's kind of disheartening in itself. But then we see the Ancient of Days show up, and he decides when these kings reign and when they don't, and finally sets up a king of his own, the one that is like a son of man, rather than like a beast. And we know that since we've read the New Testament, that Jesus liked to use the term son of man for himself. So he is that final king. And I think about the contrast between these kings that seized power through violence and oppression, and Jesus, who had a ministry that consisted of 12 disciples, and he healed individual people. It's not what we might think of as power, but that's how God decided to show up and set up his kingdom. And my prayer as I read this was that I would recognize those small ways, those ways that can be overlooked, the ways that Jesus is currently putting his kingdom into place, even when the circumstances around us are bad or uncertain. And then finally, it reminded me of a part of Hebrews 11, what they call the Faith Hall of Fame. Hebrews 11:13 specifically, the chapter before that's describing all these people in the Old Testament who did all this heroic stuff. And then 13 says, "These people all died in faith, not having received the things promised, but having seen them and greeted them from afar, having acknowledged that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For people who speak thus make it clear that they are seeking a homeland. If they had been thinking of the land from which they had gone out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared for them a city." So I think this little section is describing how all these people who did all these heroic things in the Old Testament had in their mind the end of the story. They knew that God would show up and establish his kingdom. And that was, if not the basis of their faith, definitely something that encouraged them. So from Daniel's vision, it can encourage us as well. And like I said, that's part of my prayer, and I also pray that we see God's kingdom in its small ways showing up in this time. I hope you all are surviving quarantine, and look forward to seeing you.